anyone who's joining, we have almost made it to Thanksgiving. Can you believe it? Made it to the end of November. We just want to acknowledge as a whole group all that educators are doing. It's hard to be a teacher, and to be a teacher and a school leader and anyone in a building, school building or district during a pandemic. This has been just a lot of ups and downs and roller coasters in the national news. New York City had to close their in-person school and go back to virtual. So this is a time of change, and adaptability is needed. And we just have a lot of gratitude for all the educators going through all this. I'm just going to go ahead and share a little bit about what we're reading this month. If you're tuning in for the first time, we're reading Onward by Elena Aguilar. It's about a resilience, but within resilience, she breaks it into a ton of chapters. We're on the third and final third of the book. And so we're going to be talking about curiosity, about how to bring play and creativity into our work, about the constant change that we've mentioned. And the final chapter of usually set for the end of the year is like celebration and appreciation, and how we can build a culture of that. Just as a reminder, 99 Pages is a community committed to reading and discussing 99 pages every week. We are here every Friday. Please come join us. In 2 weeks, our December selection is Tattoos on the Heart by Father Gregory Boyle. It's about an incredible Jesuit priest and missionary who started the largest gang rehabilitation and reentry program in the world out of Los Angeles. It's a very inspiring story. Very excited to talk about it in 2 weeks. And also, I wanted to let you all know, for those of you who are enjoying Onward, there's so many anecdotes and examples and tools and frameworks. There is a companion piece. It's this master text called the Workbook. So if you want to take what we've been discussing and actually say, how can I do this for myself? Or what tangibly could I give my team to work through next week? There's tons of great exercises in here. So just wanted to shout that out. I would love to go ahead and introduce our incredible panel. We'll go clockwise as always. So I'm going to start with my good friend, ECE educator, school leader, Zachariah Sherbini.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here with you tonight, and thank you for joining us. I will also say that I am now a founding coach for Edwell, which is a really wonderful wellness support program for teachers that the wonderful Jackie Newman and a colleague of hers started together. So I had my first session today, and I'm very excited to connect with educators right now, particularly with this being a year that I'm outside of schools. I think my heart is never too far from the world of schools, and so there was a nice opportunity today to connect with someone who's going right through it.
And Zachariah, one thing I wanted to say for our icebreaker intros, with Thanksgiving next week, what is one thing that you're unexpectedly grateful for, or one way that despite being in a pandemic, you're going to celebrate your Thanksgiving?
Sure. I'll take the first question. What is one thing that I am unexpectedly grateful for? And it actually had a little bit to do with my reading of this text yesterday. I read the chapter on play and creativity, and just had been feeling deficient of play. And so I called up a friend who lives not too far from me in Baltimore, and I just said, 2 hours before 5 o'clock, I was like, are you free tonight? Do you want to play a game? Do you want to be outside? And he is someone who is always down to join, to have fun, to run around. So yeah, it was sort of unexpected, but I very much needed that. And it was great to find a friend who was just as willing to do that on short notice.
I love hearing that. My co-founder of Dent Education in Baltimore, Rajan, loves basketball. So it's always fun to be his accountability partner and be like, have you played basketball in the last week? Because it's important to create time for play, which we'll be talking about today. Next up is partner at 4 Point Education Partners, Rudy Ruiz.
Good evening, Jackie. Thanks for inviting me back. Great to be back with everybody and with those tuning in. I am tuning in for myself from Central Maryland, and in addition to being a partner with 4 Point, I'm also an Edwell advisor, and glad to say so. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with communities around the country as part of 4 Point, and we are working with many districts and communities to improve educational equity. And I would just say that I'm thankful, I guess, like you said, surprised and thankful that given the social distancing requirements lately, it's exciting that people are really happy to be able to collaborate and discuss and engage in new ideas like Ed will.
Problem equals opportunity. So there's tons of potential, everybody, to collaborate and create. Please save us. Next up, we have an incredible Baltimore City Blue Point literacy coach, former English teacher herself, my friend Kendra Gray.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So excited to be here for our third session of the wonderful Onward text. One thing that I'm, I guess, unexpectedly grateful for, as we stated in the pandemic, there are problems, solutions-based thinking around how to support students and families. And so one thing I got a chance to take part in this week and last week is distribution of textbook materials to students. And you should have seen the faces when families asked, so do we get to keep these? And I mean, part of the policy because of the pandemic is that we have to be ultra careful about receiving books and materials back. So families got to hold their text a bit tighter, knowing that because of the pandemic, they get to really possess these books. So I was excited to be a part of that.
As a former English teacher myself, that warms the cockles of my heart because, like, again, physical books and being like, this is mine and I can add it to my shelf makes me really happy. And as an English teacher, I loved building my classroom library. And it was really fun to be like, no, you can keep it, you know, to a kid that like really fell in love with something.
Well, Jackie, I actually said the policy states that we cannot receive any any books back. So do with it as you wish.
Next up, I do want to introduce my friend who is the Director of Innovative Learning and Pedagogy at the African Leadership University. She's also a co-founder of which helped shape and build it, Laurel Stop.
Hi, Jackie. Thank you so much. Welcome. Thank you for having me back here. And it's a pleasure to be here this evening with you all yet again. So one thing I am for in this pandemic, in line with the kind of creativity thing, is that during the pandemic, I've started dancing again. So I haven't danced for years and years, but I took dance as a child. And for some reason, just like I was inspired to start like doing old dances that I'd done before, and then started choreographing or planning the different dances for things. And it's something that I didn't even know I still had in me, but it's just been an outlet for joy for myself during the pandemic. Didn't know it was coming. Came. It's been great. So
that makes me so happy. I want to go see dance, and I haven't. I like being in the audience more than necessarily being on stage. And I miss dance and theater. So I thank you for sharing that. That's so inspiring. Great. Well, let's just go ahead and dive into the book. The first chapter, which is really actually chapter 9, of course. And it's about curiosity. I'm just going to go and take a second to mute just in case. Great. I just heard some background noise. So this chapter is about curiosity, and in particular, how to approach challenges with curiosity. I want to share, there's a great opening anecdote where Elena talks about how many people think the first year of teaching is hard. And actually for her, it was the 6th year because she was founding a school and she was teaching a new subject and grade level. And so often it's like when we feel in over our head, how can we approach these new roles or these new environments with a sense of curiosity and an excitement for learning? So I'm just curious, anyone kind of want to talk about how you have used curiosity in your work as a way to approach challenges or to learn and grow even more?
Yeah, there's something I wanted to share about that, Jackie. And I think in that chapter as well, Elena talked about these sad Sundays that we as educators often find ourselves experiencing heading into the work week. And I think a lot of that connects to kind of this traditional notion that teachers, are supposed to be the experts and know everything. So you've got all this anxiety about being able to deliver. And I think especially right now, everything is so new. We've had these statements saying basically everyone's a new teacher right now because everything's so different in terms of the method of delivery. And so what I think is connected to a lot of the work that you've done around design thinking and helping folks think about getting comfortable with the possibility of failure is just being transparent as an educator and letting, whether it's your students or if you're a coach, letting your teachers kind of know, you know what, I don't have all the answers, but we're going to learn this together, and being willing to, as it's been put, fail forward fast, and just being open about the fact that, you know, we're going to try some things out. They might not work, but we're going to learn from it and we're going to get better from it.
I love that you mentioned design thinking, Rudy. Design thinking is so grounded in empathy, which to me is also grounded in curiosity. You have to be curious about someone else's experience. And the nonprofit I ran in Baltimore, Den Education, one of its core mindsets is first, problem equals opportunity, which is like, how do you reframe change or a challenge or an obstacle as an opportunity? Something we'll discuss actually in an upcoming chapter on change. But then two, how can you ask why? Which is one, challenge the status quo, but two, just be curious. One thing I struggle with, Rudy, is there's a level of detachment needed, I think, to be curious about something impacting you emotionally. I tend to take things personally. It's my first jump. And really, I need to be like, I wonder what's happening for the student that they're acting this way to me. Or I wonder what is going on for X, Y, or Z, the school leader. Wonder what's behind that, what's underneath that, what are the assumptions baked into that. And so it's something that I am also trying to practice. So thank you for mentioning that. Anybody else kind of want to talk about, she mentions kind of growth mindset, fixed mindset, curiosity, of course, the importance of yet. And I find it hard because I think everybody buys into, we're not there yet. That's why we're all in education. And yet we expect like results very quickly. So just curious if there's anything else from this chapter that anybody wanted to share about.
I think one thing, if I can add, is like the importance of just a myriad of change factors, and not just necessarily thinking that one change factor is going to like sweep all other things under the rug or knock everything else out of the park. I tried to coach my coachees around and my teachers around the idea that like every opportunity that you teach, you can implement a million change factors. And so it could be as something small as like, if I change how much time I spend on one part of my lesson, then this will happen. Or it can be something really large and wide, like, you know, if I implement more of a culturally diverse text in my lessons, then something else will happen. But really, like, what's most important is that folks understand that they are the drivers of their change, and that, you know, to thought partner and be a part of that means that they'll have, you know, multiple ideas and multiple backgrounds to be able to pull information from. And then the second part of being able to implement change ideas is being able to capture raw data that connects to what that change idea is that the person is trying to implement. And again, I try not to shy away from having my folks think of every aspect of whatever they experience as a possible data point, because again, I think that it's just that important that change can happen with something really, really small. I think popular saying is like, even a small candle can light a flame or something similar to that. But that's the approach that is really helpful, especially when, you know, the perfectionist mindset, everything needs to look a certain way or be a certain way. And it's so important to just celebrate even the small incremental changes that can happen.
I love your example of using data, because data is objective, and it helps me think about like, oh, well, we often are the victim of our own limiting beliefs or narratives or perceptions, and data can actually help correct an assumption, help you see the little results and successes that you need to celebrate. Kendra, I'm also curious, we had talked about, there's some concrete strategies here around time management and energy management. Has that come up at all in your coaching?
100%. I think that for me personally, I think you all have heard before, especially if you've tuned in, that I talk about the outlook call and subscribe to it. And although it definitely has its flaws, it was one of the main change factors that helped me to see how I was spending my time during the workday. A huge picture to determine how to make changes. I keep repeating the same words over and again because this is what we're talking about, but being able to make those changes to get the maximum impact for me. And I think that carries over in coaching, because one of the things that I, talk to my folks a lot about is the mindset shift around how we spend time, and not necessarily thinking about, I don't have enough time, but where is the time that I do have? Where are those holes where I can possibly alter and change things so that, my outlook is different?
You made me think, I just want to say that this group helps me protect time for curiosity, because you all are my accountability partners. Like, I know we're going to talk about a book and I have to have read the book. And again, I want to read. That is me being curious and learning. But in a lack of time management, I might not protect it unless it's like required or like I have accountability partners. So thanks to you all for really helping encourage and foster my own curiosity. Last thing I want to say before moving on from this chapter, there's a section at the end. Elena Aguilar often has these dive into sections, and she mentions shame very briefly at the end of the section on 242. And there's a lot that can be said about shame. Brené Brown has written a lot about shame. I'm curious if this section resonated for anybody about kind of how you think about shame in education, how it's used, how to alleviate it, anything connected to shame.
Yeah, definitely. That resonated with me in terms of, I've seen shame used very often as a tool for management and management of students, and even management also of adults and staff in terms of implementing accountability, but also putting in kind of like shame and shaming of behavior. But I think that she also talks about how fear can really shut down our ability to learn when we feel that fear, and shame can trigger that fear. And so it's really not the most conducive thing to getting the outcomes that we really want. And I've seen that in terms of trying to implement like really strict cultures for, let's say, like timeliness and punctuality or attendance and things like that, and shaming students and not allowing them in if they do that, or shaming them if they come in late and things like that. And I think they can create compliance, and I've seen that work, so maybe you'll do it and you'll think that you get, like better timeliness or punctuality, or you get better attendance. But I think it impacts the actual overall learning of the students and the culture that you create in terms of building that like safety. So sometimes I'll sacrifice a little bit of that rigorous organization so that I can try to much more
I lost you there at the end, Laurel, but I'm just so happy that you brought up shame as it relates to students, because I kept thinking about this book about adults. And shame is something that is so ingrained in a white supremacist culture and a very traditional, archaic mode of teaching. Kendra, we talked about it. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, just, as an educator, and especially as a Black woman, being mindful of the cultural implications that shame has, especially if, as a part of dominant culture, you utilize shame against students or others who might not be a part of that same identity marker. So, yeah, I think that more than anything, I mean, no one wants to feel shame. I think that it's probably it's one of those moments where embarrassment takes over. Like when you watch someone who's getting embarrassed, you automatically feel embarrassed too. I think shame is that times 10. And so, being mindful of the lasting impacts that shaming has, especially again, considering identity markers.
Thank you so much, Kendra. In the chat, we had Judy Bello shout out a specific page. Thanks for reading along with us. She said, I like the recs on page 238. So just for those joining, I'm just going to read. This is about energy management and the specific recs. And again, one thing that's so great about Elena Aguilar, she's very like pie in the sky. And also here's what you can do tomorrow. 1, she says, pause and renew. Our bodies need recovery. And meditation is one strategy. She also talks about others. 2, get the hardest stuff done first. Oh my God, that is so hard. But she talks about like weekend planning, how can you really just do what's hardest right after school? or right at the beginning. I think that ties, Rudy, into the sad Saturdays. Sad Sundays, what I call the Sunday blues, personally. How do you not put off the hard stuff until Sunday night? 3, she says, enlist company, which is what you all do for me, right? There's a little bit of accountability, but also just like making it more fun to make sure like I am learning and growing in my work. And then 4, what Kendra's already talked about, which is celebrate small wins. And whether you use data to do that, whether you use your own journals. I'm curious, is anybody here a big journaler? And does anybody ever go back to old journals to see like, whoa, I am not the person I was back then? I think Laurel nodding. Anybody want to share?
Oh, I usually go back and find that, I haven't really changed that much. I'm still like dealing with life the exact same way I did when I was an adolescent. It's terrifying, but yeah. But no, I find journaling and reflection to be tremendously helpful. And I love the practice of, I like to every day just write down a couple of reflections, like quick things that I learned every day. And I find that to be just very gratifying for myself.
Great. We have a question from the chat from Rajiv Srinivasan, actually the founder of 99 Pages. And a great question. It came up for me, Rajiv, too, as I was reading this. Do teachers differentiate between shame and guilt? Shame being more extrinsic, guilt being more intrinsic. Amazing. Rudy, I'm curious if you want to take that one first, or if anybody else have others they'd like to add.
Yeah, I put a little note in the chat as well, just noting that I don't think most teacher preparation programs dig into that distinction. And I think in this past spring, it's been interesting since folks in those teacher prep programs didn't have the chance necessarily to get into actual classrooms. We've been working with a partner that I think actually, Jackie, we may have a shared connection with, Immersion. So they've been doing some kind of virtual reality simulations for teachers and prospective teachers to kind of simulate some of those conversations with students and help prospective and current teachers to kind of think through those types of scenarios and then reflect on them. But I think that's a really deep question that is great that we've got different coaches on the call and others tuning in, because I think it's worth making sure that more teachers are thinking about that.
Great. Anything else that anybody wants to add? Guilt versus shame. I am a little disappointed there wasn't a definition in there. It was really helpful on the compassion one when she defined terms. In particular for me, compassion versus empathy, which we discussed last week. It's funny. I often think of shame.
I thought she did distinguish between guilt and shame. No?
Oh, yeah. Then no. I'm probably just, she probably did.
Maybe I'm thinking of the compassion one, but I thought that the guilt would, I thought she did. And she talked about guilt leading to action versus shame, just kind of like shutting down.
So
and that's something.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm reading from.
No, please, Paige.
I'm reading from 242. This is the second paragraph under the heading "A Dive into Shame," and she says, "Shame is a feeling that you are somehow wrong, defective, inadequate, and not good enough." So I see that. I read that as something quite internalized. I wonder, and it's simply a wondering, I wonder how many teachers feel that without recognizing, or without perhaps either recognizing or putting the language of shame on that. I should have done more. I can't believe I couldn't reach that kid. I can't believe that kid didn't make improvement in their reading scores. Like, there is something wrong with me. I am a bad teacher. Now, whether that stems from something like a inclination toward perfectionism, which Elena Aguilar talks about earlier in the book, or more likely a combination of other things. My sense is that in their pursuit of care for students, which is a high bar and arguably one of the most important things that goes on in our society, that many teachers feel that they're not hitting the mark. But rather than chalking it up to external factors, like I should go to another workshop, or I should plan more with teachers, and not saying that there's a right solution, but my sense, it just anecdotally, is that people internalize that, and that there's something wrong with them, and I think that's hard to carry. It's a weighty feeling. Shame is, whereas guilt, she says again on 242, the next paragraph, She says, we feel guilt when we recognize that we may have negatively affected someone else. It's a feeling of remorse about our behavior as opposed to a feeling about ourselves. So I think, Rajiv, is that relationship between internal and external. But as Elena said in one of the previous chapters when she talked about anger, I think that was maybe chapter 3 or chapter 4, she said how interesting it might be if we actually took the time at school to talk about an emotion like anger and what kind of relationship people have about it. I think the same thing about shame. I think if you ask that to if you ask people to talk about that topic, and let's suppose there's enough trust and relational groundwork put into that group setting that they would, I wonder how many people would start to see similarities with other teachers, which again helps, I think, in some ways, that like, oh, I'm not the only one that's feeling this way. I'm not the only one that feels they're defective or that they're underserving kids. I think that would be important. I also wonder how many people, if you actually sat down in a conversation with a few different people, would recognize sort of lifelong through lines. A lot of issues with shame are laid down early in life. The home life being one of them, and perhaps it's reinforced or introduced in the school setting as well. But I read, one of the books that I pulled from my shelf as we were talking is The Parents We Mean to Be by Richard Weisbord, and it says how well-intentioned adults undermine children's moral and emotional development. And I want to read, this is from the very first chapter, just a short passage here about the importance of shame for how debilitating it can be to people's well-being. He says, I was going to cite the page number, but I recognize that no one else has the book in front of them. But the author says, for 25 years, the psychiatrist and researcher James Gilligan worked with prison inmates who had committed serious, often grotesque, violent crimes. While these crimes had many sources, Gilligan uncovered one common denominator. I have yet to see a serious act of violence that was not provoked by the experience of feeling shamed and humiliated. These criminals, Gilligan observed, had typically, quote, lived for a lifetime on a diet of contempt and disdain. The risk of shame became for them worse than the risk of death. The most dangerous men on earth, Gilligan says, are those who are afraid that they are wimps. And that really stood out to me, just to underline or underscore rather the importance of recognizing the role of shame in people's development.
Wow, really powerful. And thank you for bringing us to a new text. Can you hold up the cover? Like a little show and tell. Thank you for doing that again, in case anyone missed it. You're reminding me that last part about a great documentary, and I can't remember if it's called it's basically about how toxic the words "be a man" are when used to be like toughen up, don't share your feelings.
Yeah.
Happen to shame. Like you should feel bad and ashamed for having feelings or being vulnerable or being what others might judge. I can't remember exactly. I've used the word wussy. Thank you for sharing that. I also just want to share from the chat, Rajiv, who asked this question initially, said, I personally have found guilt to be a productive emotion that's ultimately rooted in empathy for others for the pain I've caused, whereas shame is a feeling of being judged for who I am. So thank you for sharing that, everybody, and great discussion going on. I hate to move us on, but we got 3 more chapters. So I'm going to go ahead and transition into chapter 10. Nice change of pace. It's called Play and Create. It's about art, playing with our kids, doing whatever unlocks or Zachariah improves, expands our creativity. Creativity is not a binary. I'm just curious, actually, I'd love to start with Laurel, since you talked about dance at the very beginning. Like, how does a creative outlet improve your work life?
Definitely. Yeah. So I think that I also like to think about creativity as something that I'll use in my practice of teaching constantly, because I think that creativity and play, as Aguilar points out really nicely, is so important to our process of learning. And so I'm the teacher who always has markers. I bring markers to practically every class to have students use them. And I teach university students. I also teach adults, and I'll still bring the markers, and do activities. Like today in our teacher training, we did a superhero activity where we each had to kind of design our own superhero character that had both our strengths and our kryptonite. And design an emblem to go along with it. So I think there's tons of ways that we can build creativity into our practice of teaching that can be really helpful. And also play. So one of my favorite sources of kind of like information and thought about education is the MIT Media Lab, and specifically their lifelong kindergarten component. I'm a huge fan of the idea that kindergarten is the best way to teach everyone, not just kindergartners, but teaching through play and teaching through building and constructing different things, and through project-based learning is something that I think is also really great. So I try to use that quite a bit in my teaching education. And with Lifelong Kindergarten, they have kind of the 4 Ps. So projects, passion, peers, and play is kind of the tenets that they use for building learning experiences that I love. And also, there's more, but I might be freezing up, I'm not sure. But design thinking is also something that you've talked about before, but I think bringing design into our practice of education can be really helpful. So giving students design challenges that they need to solve, and using that to bring in that creativity can all be just really, really amazing. And as Aguilar also points out, having that play and having that creativity reaps tons of benefits for our mental health and our just our pleasure and joy in living in the world. So it's great all around.
I love that concept of lifelong kindergarten. I'd never heard of that. And I always think, we should be kids and we should all ask why, related to curiosity, and we should all play. My dog actually teaches me play and mindfulness because he's like, first of all, he's always sniffing. He's like, I want to explore the world. I want to explore the world. Like he literally stops and smells the roses. And he's just playful. And often I'm like, we got to hurry up this walk. Like I have another call. I have something to do. And like my puppy reminds me to play. So I love that concept of lifelong kindergarten. There was an anecdote at the beginning of this book. It's now all blurs for me, but it's about an exercise you could do with parents on like back to school night to help even get parents to play and to break down any power hierarchy or boundaries between a parent and a teacher. And so whether it's adults and students, whether it's teacher-parent, teacher-student, creating play. And I just love the word silly, being silly as something that could help. Anybody else want to talk about how creativity unlocks, their work?
I like to admire other people's creativity as well. I think about my drive into work when I do go into my school building. I have a commute of about 45 minutes. So I like to listen to podcasts. I'm a podcast person. And it really allows me to just think about the capacity that people have to be creative. And a lot of the podcasts I listen to also are focused around music. And so they talk about different pieces that music artists create and albums. And I just enjoy, hearing and seeing other people also enjoy being creative and just acknowledging their creative energy being used as a way that I can feel like I'm also inspired to be creative. So while, I don't sing well, and I dance, but not well, I don't have anything to brag about. I do enjoy the podcast medium of creativity through the pandemic, especially.
I love it. Zachariah, you shared something I'm going to post in the chat, but any kind of voiceover, I love, and especially because the chat cuts it off. Can you read aloud what you wrote? Oh, you're on mute. Or I didn't hear you, sorry.
I was on mute. I said in my dream school, I'd prioritize a playroom for faculty adjacent to the workroom, blocks, Legos, clay, drawing supplies, board games, etc. It's always been dismaying for me to find that once kindergarten is over and maybe first grade, there just is such a dearth of materials for play and creativity within the classroom. Occasionally when there's an indoor recess, for instance, there's a grade-wide store of, a few things that the kids can take out and share. But I just, particularly with the emphasis on 21st century learning and the kinds of skills and dispositions that we think kids will need now and will need into the future. Creativity and play embedded into the school setting just seems like a gimme there. And so, if it were up to me, truly every grade would have play and creativity materials, and teachers too, because I think there's something about that loss of creativity and play, unless teachers are intentional about how they spend their time outside of school. There's something about that loss of creativity and play that not only can potentially impact the development of courage, which I think is the disposition that Elena says play and creativity lead to, but potentially there's a disconnect between the experience that children have. And I think the more in touch with your students' life experiences and interests, the better those relationships are going to be in the classroom. The better your relationships are with your students, the greater the growth, generally speaking. So play for everyone.
You're also reminding me of the value of recess, right? And what does recess look like in a pandemic, and what does recess look like for adults? Some great comments in the chat. One from Rajiv: one of the best teaching moments I've ever had in my private sector career was writing a parody rap song about how to balance balance sheets as a cover of the Hamilton theme song. So, and he said, my teammates still recall all the details. So creativity as a better way to learn and unlock your brain's potential than just like rote memorization, of course. And then Judy Bello also said, I understand some of the biggest tech companies offer lots of play facilities. I will personally share, I had a friend, Katie Arrington, who they were forced to come back to school and students weren't there, but like butts and seats, adults were expected to be in the building. And the leadership put up actually like paint by number paint sets around the building. And Katie was like, this is so dumb. And then actually she went out on a break and started like painting. And she's like, now I do it every day. So sometimes we have this adult skepticism or resistance to play. Elena mentions it as well, even with her son and water guns. And then once we're in it, it does unlock something else. There's a section in this book about flow as it relates to a state of being where you've lost all track of time and maybe you feel like your creative senses are on fire. Rudy, we were talking about that. I was curious if you could jump in here.
Yeah, like you were just starting to say, when you're in that flow state, you can kind of lose yourself and just put in so much work, but it doesn't feel like work. For myself, while it doesn't sound like play to most people, I learned how to wrestle before I learned how to ride a bike. And so wrestling's been my kind of lifelong passion outside of education. And so a lot of the coaching that I've done has been in conjunction with that. And so thinking around flow and the research behind flow shows that you need a sufficient challenge level. So if it's too easy, you can't really get in your flow state. You need a sufficiently high challenge level, but that needs to be balanced by feeling like you have a sufficiently high skill level. So as folks who might support teachers or teachers supporting students, we need to help have that scaffolding, have that support, and as well as encouragement to help people move along on that skill level so that they can continue to be in their flow state as much as possible. So I think that's good for us to keep in mind for ourselves and for those that we're supporting.
Amazing. Anything else? I'm just trying to remember if there's anything. If you're not reading, you don't know this, but she times these chapters to be around the calendar year. And so she actually scheduled that this chapter on Play and Create would be March, because that's when most districts take spring break. And I love that idea. Like spring break in non-pandemic years was a chance to rejuvenate and get and play. And so I'm just curious, has anybody had amazing spring breaks that really did help change perspective when in their work or their student life? I'm just curious.
I can recall like the best spring break that I've had recently, and this was pre-pandemic. So, no social distancing, no mask, but I was able to attend my really close friend's wedding in Rome, Italy. And so it was just like a really exciting, not just to travel obviously abroad. I love Italy. I've been like 3 times, but then also for this really amazing celebration. And so, I think that I probably planned for it almost half the year, if not a little more. And it just really like is a testament to being able to recharge. And also the fact that unfortunately it's not as easy for people who work in education to use their PTO, their vacation time and things like that, because we fear missing way too much of the flow that we're in when we're at a school. And so yeah, that would take, you know, the cake when I think about the best spring break celebrations that I've had.
We have Thanksgiving next week. We had Halloween. We're coming up on winter break. Anybody have ideas to help anyone listening, any educators or yourself, as a reminder, rejuvenate or play, even though we have all these constraints right now?
I think like sleep. You know, I think sometimes for me, I can get excited about being able to sleep in and then I'll just keep myself up, and that's not productive. So really force yourself to like not pick up the phone, stay in bed, keep the blackout curtains closed a little longer if possible. And like get that recharge, that physical recharge.
I love it. Awesome. Well, let's move on to chapter 11. Oh, Laurel, jump in.
Oh, yeah, just a quick thing. I think that I've seen a lot of people really embrace decoration more than ever before, just because we are, you know, like mostly staying at home, or many of us are. And so, people went all out for Halloween in a way that I've never seen before. And I expect the same for Christmas, in terms of, being able to decorate inside and outside the house and just embrace that as something, as part of a tradition that maybe you already had, but just lean into it, because make the home, since we have to be here, the best place that they can be, and filled with joy, and also use that creativity to do it.
I will say I might be decorating. I celebrate Christmas. I might be decorating sooner than usual because I need some like festive cheer. And my mom ordered us stockings and they came in the mail, and I was so happy because Christmas brings out my inner child. And so it's a holiday that makes me think about being like 8 years old again. And so it doesn't have to be Christmas. Like, what are the ways you can bring out your inner child and your sense of play? What brings that out for you? Great. So the next second to last chapter is called Ride the Waves of Change. It's a heavy chapter because change is a constant in education. We have high school leader turnover, high district turnover. You know, we're going to have a new Secretary of Education next year. And all this is great, but like change means like you get a lot of new initiative fatigue and, okay, new person, they want new initiatives, new school turnarounds, etc. I want to share a quote from the book. It's on page 269. And it's Elena mentions that the Chinese word for change is made up of two symbols, one for danger and one for opportunity. Resilience comes from how you perceive and adapt to change. This ties back to what Kendra mentioned at the beginning of curiosity. Curiosity is important in how you approach change. I also think Rudy had mentioned a lens of curiosity is one way to help you interpret or reframe it as danger or opportunity, or even just patience to say, I'm not sure what this is yet. I need to learn more in order to, before I jump to conclusions and react. I'm just curious, have any of you led an organization through change? Change management is hard. What did you learn? Zachariah, I'd love to start with you. Thank you.
Yeah, this was probably one of the biggest, people say a lot of different words. I like the word mistakes. I'm just like old fashioned. Like this is probably like one of the bigger professional mistakes I've made. But I mean, I say it tongue in cheek with a smile because of how much I learned from it. So this was 4 or 5 years ago. This was my first year at a school in Jackson, Mississippi. So culturally so different than anything I'd ever experienced with. That was part of the allure of the opportunity of going down there. So this was on the heels of my teaching career. This was my first administrative position as the director of the early childhood program at a pre-K to 12 school. I was the first early childhood director that the school had at all. So I was the first to fill this position. And I know that everyone, as I went into that opportunity, said, you know, use your first year to learn, listen, observe. And I was like, great, got it. I'm going to do that. And I thought I had done a pretty good job in the first couple of months of building up trust, just in a variety of ways. And then I swiftly proceeded to obliterate all that trust with the kinds of changes that I was ushering in. And The short version of it is that we had a relatively static, more traditional approach to educating young children, and this was probably in the days where I thought traditional was a dirty word in education. I've come around to different perspectives on it, but I had just finished my year in grad school and had my head loaded with new ideas, and was coming to a new place and assumed that what the community wanted from me and my presence was change. Whether or not it was, I certainly didn't go about it in the right way. I can look back now and see. And so the idea was that I wanted to get more progressive pedagogy into the early childhood space, namely Reggio Emilia was a philosophy I was and am still a big fan of. We had some people with Montessori backgrounds, with Waldorf backgrounds, and I thought to myself, well, what would it look like if we combined all of these things, and wouldn't it be awesome if we had this hybrid based on not only compelling ideas out there, but teachers who some teachers who have brought that experience with them. And so I was, to kick it off, I was all like rah and messaging and try to be as inspiring as possible. And when I look back at it now, there was no substance behind it, and there were no guideposts behind it, and I didn't involve teachers in the change process. I was assuming that I could do it all and that I should be doing it all. I had a little bit of an arrogance problem at that point in my career. And one of the things that Elena says in the book, in our chapter on change, was that the secret to leading change is to deal with fear. And it's something that wasn't on my radar at all. I didn't take into account how my advocating for change in the environment and change to the pedagogy potentially threatened the identities of teachers there who had developed this early childhood program over the course of many years and put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. I didn't realize that by saying we should have changes that I was inadvertently attacking their life's work, their identity as good teachers. So that was one piece. And by not establishing the proper kind of training, the right kind of guideposts that were needed, I also didn't realize that people were fearful that they didn't know what to do. And many early childhood teachers, I have found in my experience, again, anecdotally, they tend to be people pleasers, or they at least want to know what the right thing is to do so that they can achieve that. And I there was something in place when I arrived, and I proceeded again to just yank it from right underneath their feet in a way that they didn't know what a good job was anymore. And so this idea of dealing with fear as being central to leading change, I mean, I can never forget it now. I think it's just a part of my approach to leadership. I'm glad I have it now, but I had to go through all that to get there.
I am so happy you brought up fear. And I mean, we're talking about all the big emotions today: shame, fear. And Laurel, I know I wanted to pass it on to you because you've talked a lot about threats to identity being an obstacle for change management. And so I'm just curious if you want to jump in.
Yeah, definitely. Well, when I was reading this part, it actually really reminded me of the previous book that we discussed, Teaching While the and there was a particular chapter in that book about a new teacher who was an environmental scientist, and he ended up teaching in, I think it was rural West Virginia. But he was he came in with the idea that he wanted to teach the students about climate change, and that climate change was real, right? And he was coming into a community where there was a lot of resistance to that. And it featured kind of one particular student who immediately right off the bat felt like everything that he was teaching was a threat to her personal identity, to her family's identity, and really to their livelihood, like how they had made money their whole lives, because they were involved in the coal industry, right? And so, and he did like everything that he could to try to teach, like, these are the facts, this is like the actual science, and everything. But he completely lost her in terms of she once even ran out of the class, and after that, I think never went back. And so I was reminded of that because they were also in this chapter, I think it's on page 281, talking about the backfire effect. that oftentimes when we are presented with facts and data that don't align with our worldview, and particularly with if it's our identity or linked to our identity, we will just disregard those facts. And I think that all of us are kind of fallible and able to have this kind of backfire effect, and we've all experienced it in our own ways. So we can understand that when we're trying to then exact change and present data and information in order to exact that change, it may not work, and actually many times it won't work. And kind of thinking about ways to do, if you do want change, to make it, just dealing with the fear that people might have, but also getting to know people and building the relationships first, humanizing the need for change, Aguilar talks about as well, allowing for listening to happen and dialogue, and then inviting people to engage in the process of designing or imagining different futures or possibilities are all things that become very important. Because if you go in there with just an agenda of this is what I need to do, and I need to prove that this is the right thing to do to people, it's not going to work. Yeah.
Zachariah had mentioned bringing in voice of other teachers, and you talk about listening and designing and bringing in key stakeholders. Rudy, I know this is something that you do a lot in your work, and so I'm curious if I could pass it over to you.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, definitely. I think one of the most rewarding aspects of my current role is being able to kind of share some of those learning experiences that I've had that, Zach alluded to, we felt like didn't go so well because we didn't have all these things in mind. And so a couple of the partners that we're working with currently down in Texas are actually redesigning the school year and what that looks like, adding 30 additional days to the school year, which obviously is a major change for everybody in the community, from students to teachers to families. And so I think many times for educators, like Laurel mentioned, there's that trust that has been lost. And part of that is because a lot of times when change happens, it's very top down. And so it's really critical with new change initiatives that not only do we include the different stakeholders, meaning teachers and staff and families and even students, but also to make sure that is true and authentic, that their voices are actually going to be taken into consideration and be part of the planning process. So that's been very rewarding that, I'm kind of now at this point in my career where I can help other communities do that way and not do it in a top-down fashion.
Rudy, I love your many spheres of influence. You've been a coach, a teacher, school leader, district leader. Now you're just helping many districts. So you've just been growing. And I use that term sphere of influence incorrectly because actually it's a term mentioned in this chapter that I did want to flag. It's on page 271. And Elena related to kind of energy management, dealing with change. He talks about really classifying what you can control as well as what's outside your control, which is a framework many of us are aware of with locus control. She adds a different thing, which I love, which is what you can influence as an in-between. You maybe not control school culture, but you can probably influence it by organizing a virtual happy hour or Thanksgiving bonding session. And I love, I don't know, it was a helpful reframe to give. It gave me more agency. It's not a binary, what I can control. There's actually a lot that I can influence, including, I don't know, a lot of my own reactions to things. Now that's probably should be in the fully controllable bucket. But great. Okay, we're in our last few minutes. So I actually think it's a lovely transition to the last chapter, which is about celebrate, appreciate. It's the practice of gratitude. It's the capstone of this book. There's a great quote on page 291 that I like. It says, appreciation is like a secret sauce. You only need a few drops of it every day to create a rich resilience. And I think Elena does a great job of saying a lot of these habits are just a little bit every day. Rudy, we didn't get to talk about it, but she had mentioned 50 hours of PD, which if you chunk it is an hour a week. And so similarly, can you chunk gratitude, appreciation for yourself and for others? I'm curious for anyone in this group, as a leader, how have you thought about fostering a culture of appreciation in the places where you work?
I'll jump in. I think last week it was, or perhaps the week before, I shared a practice that I learned from Linda Treadway to kind of start each meeting before diving into the agenda and the business and accountability of it all, to acknowledge each other's humanity by asking, each person to share a new and or good, I guess, from your life, which really is great. And I think connected to that, one thing that was probably the most valuable management tactic I've learned in my education leadership career was some Six Sigma training. And so even though that's kind of from manufacturing, one of the things that the trainers that we had from GE pointed out was that the last step is actually celebrating success. And they said, we know from working with educators that that's something you're very unfamiliar with. And it was really a wide eye opener for us, because they were right. We put a lot of pressure on, teachers and principals, and talk a lot about accountability and do hold people, largely accountable. But even when they manage major initiatives, multiple initiatives, take that all on and are successful, we just move on to the next thing. And it's really important to pause, be mindful, and then acknowledge them and celebrate that success, kind of re-energize them to keep moving forward.
I love that example. I'll share one example from camp. You would be shocked to know that I was a camp counselor. I love it so much. Probably my true passion and calling in life. But there was an exercise at the end of camp, just among the counselors, where people closed their eyes and half the group got up and someone was saying, put your hands on the back of somebody who taught you something. Put your hands on the back. And it was a lovely combination of touch, which I know a lot of us are lacking right now, and the anonymity of it, and how many people came to put their hands on your back and you didn't know who it was. I remember crying. It just really felt like a cathartic moment of release, that people appreciated me, and it didn't matter who. And it was, wow, I didn't notice that anybody had noticed that I'd done anything in that category. Anybody else want to share a way that they kind of foster appreciation or gratitude?
I would like to share one ritual that I implement in every planning session that I host, which is weekly. I host a planning session for ELA and special educators. And so as part of the agenda, we do the optimistic closure, we do the opener, but in the optimistic closure frames that start with, similar to what you're saying, Jackie, like, this person helped me today. I learned a lot from this person. I'd like to learn more or connect with this person. And it just allows us to just, again, slow down, because I think when we implement the actual part of the agenda, it makes people sit, and have to think. And then also, share that gratitude that doesn't necessarily always get shared outwardly in the whole group. So just, staying true to the ritual and not necessarily giving it, definitely is helpful for building like that celebration and the spirit of gratitude.
It reminds me of what we discussed last week, the secret admirers example that you can do with students or adults. I know we're getting into the last 2 minutes, and I wanted to address something before ending back on a positive note, but just everybody on this call, we're not at Thanksgiving yet, and some educators might be in a really bad place, and they might be thinking, is this for me? Whether they're a first-year teacher or a 15th-year teacher, because the pandemic has made things harder. There's a section in this chapter that is about how to know when to leave a job. And I'm just curious, in this last minute, does anybody have any thoughts on how you would help, what questions you would ask this person to consider if they're feeling near the bottom of their energy level and at the top of their burnout level? Or questions that have helped you come to that conclusion for yourself about when it's time to leave?
I definitely lean heavily on the excitement factor, and if it keeps you up at night, then explore it. If that curiosity just continues to grow deeper and deeper about any new opportunity, go after it, and always consider the fact that the beauty of education is we can experience tons of roles that are related to improving and impacting students and their outcomes and their futures. And so you don't have to feel holed in into the classroom or a school site. And if it keeps you up at night, go after it. I'm definitely a proponent of that.
I love it. Any closing thoughts on appreciation, gratitude, or closing thoughts on this book? Actually, Laurel, I always love ending with a critique, something more you would have wanted from this book. I'm curious, anything top of mind for you?
It's not so much a critique of this book as how it might be used, I think. So I think, as you were saying right now, during the pandemic, this has just been a really, really difficult time for teachers. And I think that we've seen a lot of our systems also fail, like our education systems, our broader government fail our students and fail our teachers as well. And so I just, constantly see many examples of teachers who are really, really struggling. And I've seen also kind of pushback against the kind of like self-care as a way that you can kind of take care of yourself out of these real systemic problems. And I think Aguilar actually does a really good job of trying to call that out and not fall into that. But it is something I think that I'd want to just call it as a lot of the things in this book is really like working on yourself. But there are oftentimes real systemic things that are outside of our control that make us feel like we are powerless and take away kind of the joy of being an educator. And now we are seeing that everywhere. So just wanting to not have educators feel like they need to self-care themselves out of all of the problems that we're going through right now. That now is just a really, really, really difficult time for everyone, but particularly for teachers.
I love it. And I hope anyone watching has found a community like this group or in your own school to remember that you are not alone, and to also remind you that it's not all on you. As Laurel said, it's not self-care. Like, how can we, of course, impact our own, dispositions and habits of mind, but then to figure out how to collaborate together to improve our school environment and the state of education. I am so grateful to this panel and to Elena Aguilar for this incredible book. And as I mentioned, there is a workbook if you're interested in diving in. Thank you, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving next week. I am grateful for the people here as well as anyone watching and everyone in education. Thank you so